Then he signed the divorce papers with a Mont Blanc pen, worth more than her father's house, laughing as he told her she was too plain and too quiet for his fast-paced world. He left her with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. 3 years later, billionaire Damon Sterling walked into the most exclusive event of the century, the Diamond Jubilee of Ethelgard, with his young, flashy mistress on his arm. He was there to beg the royal family for a bailout to save his crumbling empire. He thought he was walking into a business meeting. He didn't realize he was walking into an execution. Because the mysterious queen he was desperate to impress, she wasn't a stranger. She was the wife he threw away. The ink on the invitation was genuine gold leaf, embossed on heavy cream cardstock that smelled faintly of vanilla and old money. Her Royal Highness, the Grand Duchess of Ethelgard, requests the pleasure of Mr. Damon Sterling's company at the Winter Solstice Gala. Damon Sterling tossed the invitation onto the mahogany desk of his penthouse office in Manhattan. The city lights of New York sprawled beneath him, a glittering kingdom that he felt was slowly slipping through his fingers. At 42, Damon was the picture of American success, jawline sharp enough to cut glass, eyes the color of cold steel, and a net worth that usually hovered in the billions. Usually. "Is this it?" Tiffany asked, her voice high and scratching against his nerves. She was draped over his leather sofa, scrolling through Instagram. Tiffany St. Clair was 23, blonde, and possessed a kind of manufactured beauty that looked fantastic in photos but felt hollow in person. She was the prize he had won after the divorce, the fun, exciting, loud replacement for the boring life he'd left behind. "That's the ticket, Tiff," Damon muttered, loosening his tie. "The Sterling Group is bleeding cash. The European markets are freezing me out. If I can secure the contract to modernize Ethelgard's infrastructure, we're back on top. It's a $10 billion contract." Ethelgard. Tiffany wrinkled her nose. "Isn't that like a tiny place near Switzerland? Do they even have internet?" "They have the deepest private banking reserves in the world, Tiffany. And they have a new regent, a Grand Duchess who took over after the old Duke passed away 3 years ago. Nobody knows much about her. She's notoriously private. No photos, no interviews. They call her the Iron Orchid." Damon walked to the window, his reflection staring back. He looked tired. 3 years ago, he had felt invincible. He had divorced Isolde, his wife of 10 years, because she was too simple. Isolde was quiet, bookish, and refused to attend his high-profile parties. She preferred gardening and charity work to galas and yacht weeks. He had grown bored. He wanted a power couple image. Isolde wanted a home. So, he cut her loose. The prenup was ironclad. He gave her a small settlement enough to live, but not enough to matter. And she had vanished. No social media, no tabloids, just gone. "I bet she's ugly," Tiffany laughed, snapping her gum. "The Duchess, I mean. Rich women who hide their faces usually are. It doesn't matter what she looks like," Damon said coldly. "It matters that she signs the check. Pack your bags, Tiffany. We're going to Europe. And buy something expensive. I need you to look like you belong in a palace, not a nightclub." The flight to Ethelgard was a blur of champagne and Tiffany's complaints about the Wi-Fi speed on the private jet. When they landed, however, even Tiffany fell silent. The Principality of Ethelgard was a hidden jewel nestled in the Alps, a place where time seemed to stop, but wealth did not. The streets were cobblestone, but the cars parked on them were Bugattis and vintage Rolls-Royces. The air smelled of pine and expensive perfume. They checked into the Hotel Imperial, a venue so exclusive you couldn't book a room online. You had to be invited to stay. "Mr. Sterling," the concierge said, bowing low. "Welcome. The palace has sent a gift for your arrival." On the bed in the master suite lay a small velvet box. Damon opened it. Inside was a lapel pinner silver orchid with a diamond at its center. "Classy," Damon admitted, pinning it to his suit jacket. "Where's mine?" Tiffany pouted, rummaging through the bag. "Did the Duchess send me anything?" "You're the +1, Tiffany. Don't push it." There with the +1, Tiffany, don't push it. Damon felt a strange unease settling in his stomach. He was a shark in the business world, a man who had devoured competitors like the Carnegie Tech merger and the Rockefeller Plaza deal. But here in this ancient valley, he felt small. He poured himself a scotch and walked to the balcony. The royal palace loomed on the cliffside above the town, illuminated by floodlights. It looked like a fortress. I solely used to love mountains, he whispered to himself, the thought unbidden. He shook his head. Why was he thinking of her now? Isolde was probably living in some small apartment in Ohio, teaching piano lessons or knitting sweaters. She was the past. Tonight was about the future. Damon! Tiffany yelled from the bathroom. My zipper is stuck, and this dress is too tight. Damon sighed, downing the scotch. Coming, darling. He had traded peace for excitement, he reminded himself. He just wished the excitement wasn't so exhausting. The grand ballroom of the Eithel Palace was a masterpiece of Baroque architecture. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from a ceiling painted with frescoes of Greek gods. The room was filled with the elite of the world, oil tycoons from Dubai, tech moguls from Silicon Valley, and old European nobility who looked down their noses at everyone. Damon Sterling entered with Tiffany on his arm. He wore a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, tailored to perfection. Tiffany wore a daring red dress by Versace, slitted up to the hip, with a neckline that plunged dangerously low. It was a dress that screamed for attention. In New York, she would have been the star. Here, amidst the subtle elegance of silk gowns and family heirlooms, she looked like a neon sign in a cathedral. He saw the glances immediately. The whispered comments behind fans. The raised eyebrows of the Countess of Savoy. They're looking at me, Tiffany beamed, squeezing his arm. They love the dress. Keep your voice down, Damon hissed through a fake smile, and don't drink too much champagne. He scanned the room looking for his target. He needed to find the Grand Chamberlain, Lord Alistair, the gatekeeper to the Duchess. Damon, darling, a voice like grating metal cut through the crowd. It was Beatrice Vanderbilt, a gossip columnist for Vanity Fair and an old acquaintance. She swooped in, holding a martini. Beatrice, Damon nodded. You know Tiffany. Beatrice barely glanced at the girl. Charmed. Damon, have you heard the rumors? Everyone is dying to see the Duchess. She's been in mourning seclusion for 3 years since her uncle passed. Tonight is her first public reveal. Uncle? Damon frowned. I thought she was the Duke's wife. No. The old Duke had no children. He left the throne to his niece. She was raised in America, apparently. Hidden away to protect her from, well, people like us. Beatrice winked. They say she's changed the entire economy of the region in 3 years via secure emails. A genius. But a ghost. A ghost with a checkbook, Damon said. That's all I care about. Suddenly the heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. The room fell silent. Even the string quartet stopped playing. A herald stepped forward, striking a staff against the floor. All rise for Her Royal Highness, the Grand Duchess of Eithel. Isolde Genevieve Valois. Damon froze. The glass of champagne in his hand tipped slightly, spilling a drop onto his cup. Isolde. It was a common name, he told himself. A coincidence. Just a coincidence. Then she stepped out. She was standing at the top of the marble staircase, flanked by 4 royal guards in ceremonial armor. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light, shimmering like a night sky. It was modest, high-necked, but fitted in a way that commanded absolute authority. On her head sat the Valois tiara, a heavy, terrifyingly beautiful crown of sapphires and diamonds. She looked taller than he remembered. She stood with a posture of steel. Her hair, once usually tied back in a messy bun while she gardened, was now cascading in polished waves around her shoulders. But it was the face. The high cheekbones, the soft mouth now set in a line of determination, and those eyes. The eyes he had looked into for 10 years and dismissed as dull. They weren't dull now, they were blazing. "Oh my God," Tiffany whispered, too loud in the silent room. "That's the Queen. She's actually kind of hot." Damon couldn't breathe. The room spun. It was Isolde, the woman who used to clip coupons for their groceries before he made his first million. The woman who rubbed his back when he was stressed. The woman he had told to her face that she was an anchor dragging him down. She began to descend the stairs. Every step was deliberate, regal. The crowd bowed as she passed. Damon stood paralyzed. He couldn't bow. He couldn't move. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted, creating a path. She began to walk through the guests, nodding graciously, murmuring thanks. She was heading in his direction. "Damon," Tiffany hissed, tugging his arm. "Bow! You're embarrassing me!" Damon jerked his head down, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "She can't know," he thought wildly. "Maybe she won't recognize me." "It's been 3 years. I have a beard now. She sees thousands of people." He stared at the floor, watching the hem of the midnight blue dress approach. It stopped right in front of his polished Oxfords. The silence was deafening. "Mr. Sterling," a voice said. It was her voice, but it wasn't the soft, timid voice he remembered. It was rich, cultivated, and laced with absolute power. Damon slowly raised his head. Isolde was looking down at him. Her face was a mask of polite indifference. There was no anger, no sadness, no shock. It was as if she were looking at a piece of furniture. Your Highness," Damon stammered. His throat felt like sandpaper. "I see you received my invitation," she said smoothly. Her eyes flicked briefly to Tiffany, who was beaming a desperate plastic smile. Isolde's gaze lingered on Tiffany's plunging neckline for a millisecond, not with jealousy, but with a faint, amused pity. "Yes," Damon managed. I am honored. I heard your company is facing some turbulence." Isolde said, loud enough for the nearby circle of billionaires to hear. He saw the CEO of Barclays turn his head. "I do hope you haven't traveled all this way in vain. Ethelgard requires partners of substantial integrity." She smiled then. It was a terrifying smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "Enjoy the gala, Mr. Sterling. The appetizers are exquisite. I believe the tartare is particularly good. You always did like raw meat." With that, she turned and walked away, her train sweeping across the floor, leaving Damon standing in a puddle of cold sweat. "She knows you," Tiffany squealed, grabbing his arm. "Damon, you didn't tell me you knew the Queen. That's amazing. We're totally getting that money." Damon watched his ex-wife disappear into the crowd of adoring subjects. "No," Damon whispered, terror gripping his heart. "We aren't getting anything. She didn't invite me here to do business, Tiffany. Then why did she invite you?" Damon loosened his tie, feeling like a noose was tightening around his neck. "She invited me here to destroy me." Damon retreated to the furthest corner of the ballroom, seeking refuge in the shadows of a massive marble pillar. His hands were shaking so violently that the ice in his Scotch glass chimed like a frantic alarm bell. Ill soul. The name bounced around his skull, colliding with memories he had long since suppressed. He remembered the way she used to look in the morning, wearing his oversized t-shirt, hair a mess, making pancakes in their sleek, sterile kitchen in Tribeca. He remembered how she cried when he told her he was leaving, how she had begged him to reconsider, not for the money, but for them. "You're making a mistake, Damon," she had said, tears streaming down her face. "You're chasing a mirage. You're going to be lonely at the top." He had laughed at her. "I'd rather be lonely on a yacht than bored in this apartment," he had sneered. Now, looking at the woman commanding the room in a gown worth more than his first company, he realized the terrifying truth. Isolde hadn't been boring. She had been holding back. She had been a sleeping dragon, and he had been foolish enough to poke her with a stick. "This is insane," Tiffany grumbled, appearing at his elbow with a plate piled high with lobster tails. Nobody is talking to me. I tried to talk to that guy with the sash and he looked at me like I was a cockroach. And the Wi-Fi sucks. Can we go? Damon grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. Listen to me closely, Tiffany. We are not going anywhere. That woman, the Grand Duchess, she is the key to my survival. If I don't get that contract, the SEC is going to audit Sterling Corp by Monday. I will go to federal prison. Do you understand? No more shopping. No more penthouse. Prison. Tiffany's eyes went wide. She stopped chewing. Wait, you're broke. I'm illiquid, Damon corrected sharply, though the distinction was becoming meaningless. I need leverage. I need to talk to her alone. He scanned the room. Isolde was currently engaged in conversation with the Prime Minister of France and the CEO of BlackRock. She looked effortless, speaking presumably in French with a grace he had never seen in her. He had to separate the woman from the crown. He had to find the Isolde who used to rub his feet after a long day. If he could just remind her of their past, of the love they once had. Maybe he could manipulate her one last time. He was charming. He was Damon Sterling. He could sell ice to an Eskimo. Surely he could sell forgiveness to an ex-wife. Stay here, Damon ordered Tiffany. Don't speak to anyone. Don't drink anything else. Damon smoothed his jacket, fixed his tie, and began to stalk his prey. He waited until Isolde moved away from the dignitaries, heading toward the terrace for a breath of fresh air. This was his chance. He slipped through the crowd, ignoring the glares of the bodyguards, and followed her out into the biting alpine night. The terrace was expansive, overlooking a drop of 3,000 feet into the valley below. The snow-capped peaks glowed under the moonlight. Isolde stood by the stone railing, her back to him, the wind catching the midnight blue velvet of her gown. The view is breathtaking, Damon said, his voice dropping an octave to his closer tone, the one he used to seal billion-dollar mergers, but not as breathtaking as you. Isolde didn't turn around. She didn't even flinch. Flattery was never your strong suit, Damon. You usually relied on intimidation or bribery. Damon stepped closer, resting his hands on the stone railing beside her, but careful not to touch her. The air between them crackled with static. I didn't know, he said softly. Isolde, why didn't you tell me? Who you really were? She finally turned. Her face was illuminated by the pale moonlight, making her skin look like porcelain. Her expression was unreadable. Would it have mattered? She asked. If you knew I was royalty, would you have loved me? Or would you have just loved the title? We both know the answer, Damon. You fell in love with the quiet girl because she made you feel powerful, and you left her because you thought you outgrew her. I made a mistake, Damon pleaded. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away with a speed that startled him. Isolde, look at me. It's Damon. We were married for 10 years. Doesn't that mean anything? It means I wasted a decade, she said, her voice dropping to a chill that matched the wind. Do you know what I did after you threw me out? I didn't go to Ohio, Damon. I came home. My uncle, the Duke, was dying. He needed an heir. I had to learn to run a country while healing from the fact that the man I adored treated me like a used car. I'm sorry, Damon said. And for a moment, he actually meant it. Mostly because he was terrified. But I'm here now. I can help you. You need a partner who understands business. Eithilgard needs modernization. Sterling Corp can provide that. Let me make it up to you. Let's rebuild. Isolde laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Rebuild? Damon, I've seen your balance sheets. Damon froze. What? My intelligence agency is very thorough, Isolde said, turning back to the view. I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans that are currently empty. I know about the falsified earnings report you submitted to the Nasdaq last quarter. I know that you leveraged your flagship building to pay for that jet you flew in on. She turned her gaze on him, and it was like looking into the barrel of a gun. You aren't here to partner with me. You're here to beg for a bailout. You're drowning, Damon, and you thought you could swim to my lifeboat and charm your way aboard. Damon's mouth went dry. She knew everything. The fraud, the lies, the desperate house of cards his life had become. "Please," he whispered, all arrogance gone. "If I don't get this contract, I lose everything." Isolde studied him for a long moment. A flicker of something crossed her eyes. Was it pity, or was it cruelty? "I won't hand you a contract for old time's sake," she said. "But I am a benevolent ruler. I will give you a chance to prove you are still the titan of industry you claim to be." "Anything," Damon said quickly. "Tonight is the Royal Charity Auction," Isolde said. "We are raising money for the orphans of the war in the neighboring region. It is a test of character and capital. If you can prove your generosity and your liquidity by winning the centerpiece item, I will consider granting you a private audience to discuss the infrastructure deal." "Win the auction," Damon repeated. "I can do that." "The centerpiece is the Star of Valois necklace," Isolde said. "It is priceless to my family. Don't disappoint me, Damon. Everyone will be watching." She walked past him, back toward the warmth of the ballroom. As she passed, she whispered one last thing. "And do something about your guest. She's trying to steal silverware." Damon was left alone in the cold, his heart racing. He had a chance. He just had to win an auction. He didn't have the money, but he had credit lines he could stretch, favors he could call in. If he won the bid, he got the contract. The contract would pay out in advance that would cover the bid. It was a gamble, a Ponzi scheme of logic, but it was the only play he had left. He straightened his tie. The shark was back in the water. The dinner was an exercise in torture. Damon and Tiffany were seated at table 4, near the back, a deliberate slight, while the kings, queens, and tech billionaires sat near the royal high table. Damon was placed next to a deaf countess who refused to wear her hearing aid and a minor industrialist from Steel Country who hated Damon's guts because of a hostile takeover back in 2018. "This soup is cold," Tiffany announced loudly, dropping a spoon with a clatter. "Damon, tell them to heat it up." "It's gazpacho, Tiffany," Damon hissed through clenched teeth. "It's supposed to be cold teeth. It's supposed to be cold." "Shut up!" "Well, it's stupid," she muttered, pulling out her phone to take a selfie with the bread basket. Number royal life, number queen vibes. Damon drank his wine in one gulp. He kept his eyes glued to the high table. Isolde sat at the center, flanked by the Prime Minister and a handsome, broad-shouldered man, Prince Nicholas of Sweden. Damon felt a surge of irrational jealousy as he watched the prince lean in and whisper something that made Isolde laugh, a genuine, warm laugh he hadn't heard in years. "Who's the Kendall?" Tiffany asked, following his gaze. "Prince Nicholas," the steel industrialist next to them grunted. "Rumor has it he's the frontrunner for the Duchess's hand. A merger of Sweden and Æthelgard. Now that is a power couple." Damon gripped his fork so hard it bent. After the dessert, a gold-flaked chocolate mousse that Tiffany declared too bitter. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit a podium at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced. "Welcome to the annual Royal Charity Auction. All proceeds go to the Valois Foundation." The auction began. The money being thrown around was sickening. A vintage Ferrari sold for $3 million. A private dinner with the Rolling Stones went for $1.5 million. Damon sat on his hands, sweating. He had to wait for the main event. Finally, the room went silent. 2 guards brought out a glass case. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a necklace that seemed to capture the very essence of light. Diamonds the size of quail eggs surrounded a central sapphire that was as deep and blue as the ocean. "The Star of Valois," the auctioneer boomed, "commissioned in 1895, worn by 3 queens. We start the bidding at $2 million. $2 million, shouted a sheikh from the front table. 2.5, countered a sheikh from the front table. 2.5, countered a tech mogul. 3 million. Damon's heart hammered. He calculated his remaining credit. He had about 4 million in liquidity if he liquidated his personal portfolio, and maybe another 2 million in emergency lines. 4 million, the sheikh yelled. The room went quiet. $4 million for a necklace. Damon stood up. He buttoned his jacket. All eyes turned to him. He saw Isolde watching him from the shadows of the high table, her expression unreadable. "Prove yourself," she had said. $5 million, Damon stated, his voice projecting across the hall. A gasp went through the crowd. Tiffany squealed, grabbing his arm. "Damon, oh my God, for me!" $6 million, the sheikh countered, looking annoyed. Damon didn't hesitate. $7 million. He was now betting money he didn't have. If he won this and Isolde didn't sign the contract immediately, he was going to jail for check fraud. It was all or nothing. $7 million going once, the auctioneer called. The sheikh shook his head. "Too rich for my blood. $7 million going twice." Damon looked at Isolde. She raised her glass to him slightly. A victory toast. "Sold. To Mr. Damon Sterling for $7 million. The gavel banged. The sound was like a gunshot. Applause erupted. Tiffany jumped up, wrapping her arms around Damon's neck. "Baby, I knew you loved me. I knew it. $7 million. Take that, you losers." She broke away from him and literally ran toward the stage. The applause faltered. People began to murmur, "Tiffany, wait." Damon hissed, trying to catch her, but he was blocked by the waiters bringing more champagne. Tiffany bounded up the stairs to the stage. The auctioneer looked terrified. She grabbed the microphone. "Thank you, everyone," she shrieked, her voice echoing painfully. "Damon is the best boyfriend ever, and this necklace is going to look so good with my dress." She reached for the glass case. "Stop." The single word cut through the room like a blade. Isolde stood up. She didn't shout, but her voice carried absolute authority. She walked down from the high table, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. She stepped onto the stage, towering over Tiffany, who suddenly looked very small and very cheap. "The Star of Valois," Isolde said into her own lapel mic, "is not merely jewelry. It is a symbol of Ethelgard's history." She turned to face Damon, who was standing frozen by table 4. "Mr. Sterling has indeed made a generous bid," Isolde continued, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "However, there seems to be a misunderstanding regarding the nature of the auction." She gestured to the screen behind her. "The winner of the auction does not keep the necklace," Isolde announced. "The winner earns the honor of donating the necklace to the National Museum of History and having their name engraved on the display plaque. It is a charitable donation, not a purchase of goods." The room went dead silent. Tiffany's jaw dropped. "What? You mean we paid $7 million for a plaque? Precision in business is key, is it not, Mr. Sterling?" Isolde said, locking eyes with Damon. "You always told me to read the fine print." The auction catalogue clearly states the terms on page 1. Damon felt the blood drain from his face. He had just spent $7 million money he didn't have for a piece of metal in a museum. He got nothing. No asset to resell. No collateral. Just a hole in his bank account that was now a crater. "But," Tiffany stammered into the microphone, "but I wanted it, I'm afraid," Isolde said, stepping closer to Tiffany and gently taking the microphone from her hand. "That you are out of your depth, my dear. And frankly, that shade of red clashes with the sapphires." Isolde snapped her fingers. 2 guards stepped forward. "Please escort Mr. Sterling's guest back to her seat. She seems overwrought." As Tiffany was led away, crying and stumbling, the elite of Europe laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. It was a polite, devastating titter of amusement. Damon stood alone. He had been outmaneuvered. He had tried to buy his way into her good graces, and she had let him hang himself with his own checkbook. Isolde looked at him one last time from the stage. "Thank you for your donation, Mr. Sterling," she said sweetly. "The orphans of the region thank you. I expect the wire transfer by morning. We do not accept credit." She turned and walked away. Damon sank into his chair. He was ruined. But the night wasn't over. As he sat there, head in his hands, a man in a dark suit approached him. He recognized him as the chief of the Royal Police. "Mr. Sterling," the officer said quietly. "Yes?" Damon mumbled. "There is a matter of some irregularities with your passport entry documents," the officer said, "and we have received a notification from the American Embassy regarding an SEC investigation. The Grand Duchess has graciously allowed you to stay for the gala, but I'm afraid we must ask you to accompany us to the station immediately following the dessert course." Damon looked up. This was it. The walls were closing in. He looked across the room at Isolde. She was back at her table, laughing with Prince Nicholas. She didn't look at him. She had already moved on. He was the billionaire who had flaunted his mistress. And she was the queen who had just checkmated him in 4 moves. The holding cell at the 8th Elgard Royal Police Headquarters was surprisingly nice. It had underfloor heating, a decent mattress, and the walls were painted a calming shade of sage green. It was, Damon Sterling reflected bitterly, nicer than the first apartment he and Isolde had shared in Queens. He had been sitting there for 3 hours. His tuxedo was wrinkled. His tie was gone, confiscated as a potential choking hazard, and his $7 million bid hung over his head like a guillotine blade. He didn't have the money. When the wire transfer failed in the morning, he wouldn't just be humiliated. He would be criminally liable for fraud in a foreign monarchy. The heavy steel door buzzed and clicked open. Damon stood up, expecting a lawyer or a police officer. Instead, Isolde walked in. She had changed out of a ball gown. She now wore a crisp white silk blouse and tailored black trousers, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She looked less like a queen now, and more like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, which, in many ways, she was. She was alone. No guards, no lawyers. "Comfortable?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Isolde," Damon breathed. "You have to get me out of here. This is a misunderstanding. The SEC investigation it's routine. I can explain the bid. I just need time to move some assets." "Sit down, Damon," she said calmly, taking the chair opposite the small metal table. Damon sat. He felt like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "You don't have any assets to move," Isolde said, placing a folder on the table. "I read the report. You're leveraged at 400%. Your creditors are circling. You came to Ethelgard hoping my ignorance would be your salvation. You thought the little housewife you divorced wouldn't know how to read a balance sheet." Damon looked at his hands. "I never thought you were stupid, Isolde, just unambitious." "Unambitious?" Isolde raised an eyebrow. "Because I didn't want to spend every weekend networking with people we hated? Because I preferred reading to attending yacht parties where everyone was high on coke?" She opened the folder. "Do you remember the night you asked for the divorce?" Damon flinched. "Isolde, don't." "You came home late," she continued, her voice steady. "I had made roast chicken. Your favorite. You didn't even sit down. You stood in the hallway, suitcases already packed in the car, and you told me that I was holding you back. You said you needed a partner who could shine in your world. You offered me a settlement and told me to be grateful." "I was an idiot," Damon whispered. "I was drunk on my own hype. I know that now." "You broke me, Damon," she said, and for the first time her voice cracked slightly. "I loved you. I supported you when you were selling knockoff watches out of a trunk. I believed in you when no one else did. And the moment you made it, you threw me away like trash." She leaned forward, her eyes hard. "And then you show up here, with her, flaunting your upgrade in my face. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was so pathetic that I would just hand you a $1 billion contract because you smiled at me?" "I didn't know it was you," Damon cried. "I swear, if I had known, if you had known, you would have what? Manipulated me differently?" Isolde cut him off. "That's the problem, Damon. You only value people for what they can give you. You don't see people, you see assets and liabilities." She stood up and walked to the small window. I could leave you in here, she said softly. Fraud in Ethelgard carries a mandatory 5-year sentence. The prisons here are nice, but 5 years is a long time for a man who needs to be in New York to save his company. Damon felt the blood leave his head. Please, Isolde. I'll do anything. I'll apologize. I'll leave Tiffany. I'll give you shares in Sterling Corp. Isolde turned around, a look of utter disdain on her face. I don't want your felling company, Damon. I have a country to run. She tossed a single piece of paper onto the table. Sign this. Damon grabbed the paper. It was a confession. Not of fraud, but of incompetence. It was a public statement admitting that Sterling Corp had misled investors, that his financials were inflated, and that he was stepping down as CEO immediately. If you sign this, Isolde said, I will cover your bid for the necklace. I will call the police chief and have the charges dropped. You will be free to go back to New York. But your career will be over. You will be ruined, but you will be free. Damon stared at the paper. It was a death warrant for his ego. It was the end of Damon Sterling, the Titan. And if I don't, then the trial starts tomorrow. Isolde said simply, and I will personally testify against you. Damon looked at the pen. He looked at Isolde. He saw the woman he had underestimated, the woman he had hurt. She wasn't doing this for revenge, he realized. She was doing it for justice. She was balancing the scales. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled. He signed. The morning sun hit the snow-capped peaks of Ethelgard with a blinding brilliance, but Damon Sterling felt none of the warmth. He sat in the back of a black town car, heading toward the private airstrip. Tiffany was gone. She had taken an earlier commercial flight, paid for by the palace, after having a hysterically tearful meltdown in the hotel lobby. Damon was alone. He had his freedom, but he had nothing else. The statement had already been released. His phone had been buzzing non-stop for hours. Lawyers, board members, reporters. He had turned it off. The stock of Sterling Corp had plummeted 60% in pre-market trading. It was over. As the car wound down the mountain road, the driver slowed down. Roadblock ahead, sir, the driver said. Damon looked up. A Royal Guard stood in the middle of the road, hand raised. The car stopped. The door opened. It was Lord Alistair, the Grand Chamberlain. Mr. Sterling, Alistair said, his voice clipped. Her Royal Highness requests one final word before you depart. Damon sighed. Hasn't she done enough? It is not a request you can refuse, Alistair said. Damon got out of the car. He was led not to the palace, but to a small, ancient stone chapel nestled in a grove of pine trees near the airfield. He walked inside. The air was cool and smelled of incense. Isolde was sitting in the front pew, staring at a stained glass window depicting a knight slaying a dragon. You came, she said, not turning around. I didn't have much choice, Damon muttered, sitting in the pew behind her. I wanted to show you something, Isolde said. She stood up and walked to a small side altar. There was a picture frame on it. Damon walked over. He looked at the photo. It was a picture of him. It was from 10 years ago. They were at Coney Island. He was wearing a stupid hat, holding a giant stuffed bear he had won for her. He looked young, happy and carefree. He didn't look like a billionaire. He just looked like a man in love. I kept this, Isolde said softly, even after everything. Because I wanted to remember that the man I loved was real, that he wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Damon felt a lump in his throat. He was real, Isolde. I lost him somewhere along the way. I got hungry. I wanted the world, and I forgot that you were my world. Isolde looked at him, and for the first time her eyes were soft. I know, she said. That's why I made you sign that paper, Damon, not to destroy you, to save you. Damon frowned. Save me? You destroyed my company. You ruined my reputation. I destroyed the lie, Isolde corrected. Sterling Corp was a sinking ship. If you had kept going, you would have ended up in prison for 20 years for fraud. By forcing you to step down, by forcing you to admit the truth now, the fallout is manageable. You won't go to jail. You'll lose your money, yes. But you have your freedom. You have a chance to start over. Damon stared at her. She was right. The Ponzi scheme he had been running was weeks away from collapsing on its own. She had popped the bubble before it turned into a criminal conviction. Why, he asked, his voice shaking. After what I did to you, why save me? Isolde reached out and touched the photo, tracing the face of the young man he used to be. Because that man in the photo, she said, bought me hot dogs when we had $5 to our names. He held my hair when I was sick. He was my best friend. I mourn him, Damon. But I don't hate him. She turned to face him. She reached into a pocket and pulled out a small envelope. This is for you. Damon took it. It was a check. A personal check from her private account. It was for $50,000. That's exactly what we had in our joint savings account when you left me, Isolde said. I'm giving it back. It's seed money. Go somewhere new, Damon. Start over. Build something real this time. Something you can be proud of. Not for the cameras, not for the money, but for yourself. Damon looked at the check. $50,000. It was nothing compared to what he had lost. But it was everything. It was a lifeline. Isolde, he said, tears stinging his eyes. I don't, she said, stepping back. Don't, she said, stepping back. Don't apologize. Just do better. She walked past him toward the door. Goodbye, Damon. Don't come back to Eithilgard. Damon stood in the silent chapel, holding the check. He looked at the photo of his younger self. He looked at the door where the Queen had exited. He walked out of the chapel. The air was crisp and cold. He took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the air didn't smell like money or stress. It just smelled like air. He got back into the car. To the airport, sir? The driver asked. Damon looked at the check in his hand. Yes, Damon said. But not to New York. Take me to the train station. I think I'll go to Italy. I've always wanted to learn how to make wine. The driver nodded. As the car drove away, Damon Sterling, the former billionaire, didn't look back at the palace. He looked forward at the road. He was broke. He was alone. But for the first time in a decade, he was free. 5 years is a long time in the world of high finance. In 5 years, empires rise and fall, technologies render industries obsolete, and billions of dollars change hands in the blink of an eye. But in the rolling hills of Tuscany, 5 years is merely the time it takes for a vine to mature, for the roots to dig deep into the clay, and for the grape to learn the character of the soil. Damon wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of a dirt-stained glove. The Tuscan sun was beating down on the rows of Sangiovese grapes that lined the small, steep hill he now called home. He looked nothing like the man who had worn a Tom Ford tuxedo to the Eithilgard Gala. His beard was trimmed but thick, peppered with more gray than black. His skin, once pallid from hours under fluorescent office lights, was now deep bronze and weathered. He wore a faded linen shirt, denim trousers covered in dust, and heavy work boots. Signor Damon. Damon turned. Giovanni, his 70-year-old neighbor and mentor, was waving from the stone fence. "The distributor is here," Giovanni shouted in broken English. "He says he likes the color, but he wants to negotiate the price." Damon smiled. A real smile. It crinkled the corners of his eyes. Damon smiled. A real smile. It crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Tell him the price is the price, Giovanni. If he wants cheap wine, he can go to the supermarket. We sell patience here." Giovanni laughed and waved a hand. "You are stubborn, Americano, but you learn." Damon walked back toward the small farmhouse that served as both his home and his winery. It was a modest life. The $50,000 Isolde had given him hadn't bought a villa, it had bought a ruin. He had spent the first 2 years sleeping on a mattress on the floor, fixing the roof himself, learning to prune vines until his hands bled. He had vanished from the world. The tabloids had run stories about the disgraced billionaire for a month or two. They speculated he was in hiding in Belize or dead. Eventually, the news cycle moved on. Tiffany St. Clair had given a tell-all interview to a trashy magazine, claiming she was a victim of his manipulation before marrying a 70-year-old oil tycoon from Texas. Damon had seen a photo of her recently. She looked weighed down by diamonds, her eyes empty. He felt no anger, only a distant sort of pity. He entered the cool, damp cellar. The smell of oak and fermenting grapes filled his lungs, a scent he preferred infinitely to the smell of ozone and fear that used to permeate his penthouse. A man in a sharp suit was waiting for him. The distributor. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, looking at Damon's dirty boots with distaste. "Your Chianti is surprisingly adequate, but your asking price is aggressive for a label with no history." "It has history," Damon said quietly, running a hand over a barrel. "It's just a history I don't put on the bottle." "Look, I can take 50 cases," the distributor sighed, "but I need a name. You just call it Lot 42. It's not marketable. You need a story." "The wine is the story," Damon said firmly. "Take it or leave it." The distributor hesitated, then nodded. The wine was good. It had a complexity that spoke of struggle and resolution. "Fine, 50 cases. But I have a special request. A private client in Zurich wants to buy your entire reserve of the 24 vintage. All of it." Damon frowned. The 2024 vintage was his first successful harvest. It was the year he had finally stopped waking up in a cold sweat dreaming about the SEC. It was the best wine he had ever made. "Who is the client?" "Anonymous," the distributor said. "They pay through a blind trust, but they specifically requested the wine made by the American in Val d'Orcia. They offered triple the market rate." Damon felt a strange thrumming in his chest. A blind trust in Zurich. A private client who knew exactly where he was. "Accept the offer," Damon said, his voice husky, "but on one condition. I handle the shipping of the first case personally." A week later, Damon sat in the small post office in the village, carefully packaging a wooden crate. Inside were 12 bottles of his 2024 vintage. He hadn't named the wine Lot 42 because of a random number. It was the age he was when his life fell apart. The age he started over. He slipped a small envelope into the crate. Inside was a note. No letterhead, no crest. Just plain paper. "It pairs well with roast chicken. D." He sealed the crate and addressed it not to Zurich, but to a specific address he remembered by heart. The Palace of the Grand Duchy, Ethelgard. "Attention, Her Royal Highness. Eiffel. Dua. Attention, Her Royal Highness." 3 days later, in the high tower of the Ethelgard Palace, the winter snow was falling softly against the reinforced glass. Isolde Genevieve Valois sat by the fireplace. She looked tired. Running a country was exhausted work, even for the Iron Orchid. The trade negotiations with the European Union had been grueling, and Prince Nicholas, though a charming companion and a staunch ally, was currently in Sweden, dealing with his own family matters. She was alone. "Your Highness," Lord Alistair entered, bowing. "A package has arrived." It cleared security. It appears to be wine." Isolde looked up from her paperwork. "Wine? From whom?" "There is no return address, ma'am. Just a postmark from Italy." Alistair placed the wooden crate on the low table. He pried the lid open with a small tool. Inside, nestled in straw, were dark green bottles. Simple labels. Lot 42. Isolde's breath hitched. She reached in and found the envelope. She opened it and read the 6 words. "It pairs well with roast chicken. A smile, genuine and bright, broke across her face, taking 10 years off her age. She remembered the night he left, the cold kitchen, the uneaten chicken, the silence. "Alistair," she said, standing up. "Cancel my evening review with the ministers, ma'am, and tell the kitchen I want roast chicken for dinner. Simple. No sauces, no foams, just roast chicken." "Very good, Your Highness. Shall I decant the wine?" "No," Isola said, picking up a bottle. She ran her thumb over the rough, textured paper of the label. She could almost feel the grit of the Tuscan soil, the heat of the sun, and the labor of the hands that had made it. "I'll open this one myself." Back in Tuscany, the sun was setting. The sky was a bruised purple and gold. Damon sat on his porch, a glass of his own wine in his hand. He wasn't alone. A small, scruffy terrier he had adopted from the village shelter was sleeping at his feet. He took a sip. It was earthy, with notes of cherry and leather. It tasted like hard work. It tasted like peace. He didn't have $1 billion. He didn't have a private jet. He didn't have a legacy that would be written in Forbes magazine. But he had this: the sunset. The dog. The wine, and the knowledge that somewhere, hundreds of miles away, the only woman he had ever truly respected was perhaps, just perhaps, raising a glass with him. He raised his glass toward the north, toward the mountains he couldn't see. "To the Queen," he whispered to the empty air. He took a drink, closed his eyes, and listened to the wind rustling through the vines. It was the richest he had ever felt. And that is the story of Damon Sterling and the Iron Orchid. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the rock bottom is the solid foundation we need to rebuild our lives. Damon lost his fortune, his status, and his ego, but he found something far more valuable: his humanity. And Isolde proved that true power isn't about cruelty. It's about grace, justice, and the wisdom to know when to destroy an enemy and when to save a man. What do you think? Did Damon deserve his second chance? Or should Isolde have let him rot in prison? And what would you have done if you found out your ex was secretly a royal? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, redemption, royalty, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a drama-filled story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.